Is this been worth your while? All right. So, just a couple quick housekeeping notes before we get to our capper, which I'm really excited about. Again, we want to award someone with $50,000 to bring the most popular idea that you've heard today here to Philly. So go on page 3 of the program are the instructions for how to vote. And the voting will stay open for a few weeks. And you can go to the website to get more information and to let your voice be heard. Secondly, after this next panel discussion, we're going to have a happy hour at Zavino. Roxanne and I have been anticipating that happy hour since 9 in the morning. So we'll be the first ones over there. And finally, a reminder that many of our speakers today have written books, including Michael Eric Dyson, who's about to join us. 2 of his books are on sale right now. I happen to think that his sermon for white people is one of the most important books in the last couple of years, period. So please buy that. He has been after me to remind you of that because, as he said, he has grandkids to feed. So thank you all for coming, and I'll see you over at Zavino.
Please welcome author and professor Michael Eric Dyson, pastor of Cincinnati's Crossroads Church, Chuck Mingo, and president of United Way of Greater Philadelphia and practicing pastor of Arch Street Presbyterian Church, Bill Golderer.
You're practicing pastor. Does that mean you ain't got it right?
All right. You guys. So I was told by Larry that we're running a little bit ahead of time, which is perfect because now you got 3 pastors up here to
make that up easily.
Talk you to death. We got extra time. No, we don't have extra time. I'm grateful. Before we jump in, if you wouldn't mind indulging, Larry, Roxanne, and Jordan have just put on a great day, and I feel like we should acknowledge the citizens. And you got to give it to the team at the Citizen, because when we talk about ideas we should steal, probably the last thing that would have come to mind is how do we bring faith to bear on that? Because I think some of the ideas that we're trying to think about is how do we bring equity? How do we imagine a society different from the one we currently have? And that's usually born of innovation or new ideas. And really, when we're talking about faith, we're talking about the oldest of stories and the oldest of ideas that maybe aren't practiced so well. And so I'm going to ask you all to lead off in your own way. When we're talking about practical ideas that we could live into, I know Chuck and Dr. Dyson have a lot of experience with this, but in our current context where faith so often, when we think of it, brings us into a place that is defensive, divisive, and dogmatic. But there's another way, and I'm wondering if you could talk about how the other way can take hold in a time like this.
Yeah, it's a great question. You know, as I think about faith, I think two extremes. You know, there's the institutional view. And the institution tends to focus on the preservation of tradition, the protection, kind of a us versus them mindset when it comes to faith. But I think that, at least for me, as I'm informed by my own faith and kind of how I see Jesus as both a historical figure but also as a faith figure, he talks a lot and he obviously embodies an incarnational approach. And an incarnational approach is always the opposite of the institution. It's the approach that comes in with humility, understands the context, and from that context seeks to love, to be present, and to serve in ways that uplift the context that you're in. And so for me, as I think about where faith sits in this conversation, I think it'd be easy in this context that we're in right now, macro, national, global, for faith to be an institutional thing, and I think there's power in it being an incarnational thing, which is also constantly reinventing itself.
Sure. Dr. Dyson?
No, that's a great point, and it's a great honor to be here today. My old friend Larry Platt, go way back like babies and pacifiers. Yeah, I think that Pastor Mingo really nailed it there with that institutional versus incarnational. Because where we live, where we grieve, where we grow, where we nurture, where we resist, where we question, is in the lived experience of the body. Howard Thurman, the great mystic, said that the life and the time and place of a person's life on earth is the time and place of his or her body. And so that incarnational theology is about the body and the flesh and the identity of the human being confronting a myriad of possibilities and problems. And you know, the advertisements for faith, the commercials for God are pretty bad right now. You know, it reminds me of, you know, this preacher told me, he said, you see this kind of Christian coming, you want to give 3 cheers for sin. And so, you know, when the name of God has been hijacked by so many people who are mean and nasty and brutal and hurtful, to be on stage with these 2 gentlemen of high exemplary moral character, it's a beautiful thing. And you know, the older I get, the more I'm determined that my religion is love. And if you love other people and that's what you're doing, then we on the same team. And if you ain't, we just ain't. And so people can have faith who are not even religious, right? People exercise an intimate relationship to the cosmos, mediated through their sense of connection to another human being. And faith, you know, is alive and electric in those interactions. So I rather much like that incarnational versus the institutional, probably because the institution has a lot of problems with me, and for good reason. They're very good people. But also because I think we've got to challenge ourselves to open ourselves more to the spirit and to the sense of wonderment that might connect us as human beings.
So let's build on that for a minute. When you say your religion is love, love in this world can be greeting card sentiment or performative,
right,
demonstrative, sacrificial, costly, painful. And I just wonder if you could talk about, when we talk about love and the gospel, that invites us to a performative way of being. So, right, if you're talking about faith as stale rehearsing of codified beliefs, then you can't grow and you probably can't love. But if you were to locate yourself inside of not a set of codified beliefs etched in stone, but rather an empowerment narrative that has authority over your life, that drives you into a sacrificial love, how does that look in community? And I'd like you to talk about what we can learn from Cincinnati, and also, if you want to, we are in a university, so we could talk about the academy, or how we are raising young people to live empowered leadership lives.
Yeah.
Let's hear
Please.
from Cincinnati.
Please, now
Let's
you
hear
go
from
first.
the he's a real preacher.
You are a great preacher.
He's a real
Yes.
pastor. He's on the front line. So I'm just going to, trail after you.
Well, I'll talk about what we're learning in Cincinnati, because I think that's the thing that's empowering us to move forward through something we call Undivided. So I pastor a church in Cincinnati, and I have to also say it's great to be back in Philadelphia. So I'm born and raised here, West Oak Lane, Central High School
Welcome
grad,
him back.
class 253. So it is awesome to be home. I'm sure all the Central alum in the room could stand up and sing the alumni song, but we won't do that. But in Cincinnati, it's an interesting context, coming from Philadelphia to a Midwestern city, a very divided city with a history to go along with it. Not that Philadelphia doesn't have that. I find myself at a church that over the last 11 years that I've been there as a leader there, and even 17, 18 years before that, we've grown in terms of our at least visible diversity of the church and also socioeconomic diversity, and find ourselves in a place where it's easy to do what we're doing right now. If I look at this room is diverse in a lot of ways. I can see that with my eyes. We were in the same place when about now 4 years ago, I felt a call to really say, but what does it look like for us to live in love? To not just attend in love, but to live in love. And we had 1,200 people step into a 6-week conversation around race and reconciliation, and it was difficult, and it was hard, it was challenging, it was also powerful. And as that happened, one of the things we recognized was the gap oftentimes in what you're saying is relationship. So of those 1,200 people, all who were in for something new, 50% of them had never had a person of a different race over to their home for dinner. These are all people in the same church. These are people who have actually raised money and traveled to South Africa and India to do mission work together. And yet, in our context, we had never done the basic things of breaking bread. And so you talk about that empowerment narrative. It needs to be empowering because it's significant work and it requires relationship. And I think that's what I see with love. The best definition of love I've ever heard is by an author, Greg Boyd. He says it's ascribing worth to another person at cost to yourself. And I think it's ascribing worth to another person at cost to yourself. And if you use that definition of love, it puts you in uncomfortable places with different people, in places where you are going to be off equilibrium, but where I think ultimately you can get to a place where love is a lived experience, not just a codified concept.
No, that's great. And I agree with all of that. I think that, and to piggyback on what you're saying and then to respond to Pastor Golderer, I don't mean that sentimental stuff. Martin Luther King Jr. spent many a day, sometimes here in Chester, talking about the difference between philia, agape, and eros. But I do mean love in the radical sense of the demand, that Greg Boyd definition is right. I'd like to say that justice is what love sounds like when it speaks in public. So right relationship with God mandates right relationships with other people. The late great Dr. James Washington said, some people go to church to love God instead of their neighbors.
Wow.
And so, so you can go to South Africa, you can go across the world, but you can't go to each other's cribs. Right? That's all of us. That's not indicting them. That's what Eric Holder meant when he said we're a nation of cowards. We ain't even in each other's houses on the weekends. Everybody goes their own way. And so love for me is a radical demand of presence. It's a ministry of presence. To show up, your notion of performativity is correct. And not the notion of performativity to display a spectacle of dramatic proportions to the other, but is to dramatize the sincere devotion of the human heart to the betterment of the human condition. And that means asking serious things. And like you said, the conversations are tough. When you have love, you have to have open and honest conversation. And I know I get a lot of hate mail every day from white people, calling me nigger, nigger this, nigger that, you fucking nigger. I'm at the point now, could you please just call me Dr. Nigger? If you could just acknowledge my pedigree, I'd feel better. I studied for the degree, Professor Nigger even, if that's what you want. And they get mad, and I'm trying to show love. And how I show love is not sentimentally, but to ask that we be present for each other and unmask ourselves and tell the truth about white privilege, white supremacy, complicity of whiteness. It's asking white women, what's up with the elections, right? And the 18% of black women in Florida who voted, say for Ron DeSantis, I'm not saying voting left or right is God or not God. I'm saying for the interests of the human being, one is a bigot, and he made himself clear that he was a bigot. He didn't turn back money from people who were racist, and he said, don't monkey this up. So we get the message. We ain't stupid. We know what you're saying. And so I'm saying, if you are a Christian and you're voting for Hyde Smith down in Mississippi and she's having public lynchings, come on. At the same time, you know, when I try to challenge and love black people at churches where I go preach, you know, I was in Cleveland and a woman came up to me, she said, you know you're going to hell. I said, wow. I said, I know 25 reasons why I should go to hell, but tell me which one do you actually know? I'm just curious. Like, did Jesus tell you I was going to hell already? I said, I don't even have to watch my cholesterol if that's what it is. She says, you know what I'm talking about, don't be funny. She said, you said God created gay people. I said, now you think I'm going to hell? And you a polytheist? I mean, you think there's a God for gay people and one for straight people, right? And so, you know, she got madder. And
You have
and
that
then,
gift.
yeah, I do. I do have that gift to make them pissed. So, you know, I think out of love, we have to challenge ourselves, right? I challenge myself. I try to speak against homophobia, but I recognize it in myself. I speak against classism, and I notice it, the elitism that I struggle with. You know, we got to confront the very thing that we want others to confront as well. So love to me is not sappy, sentimental. It's about a radical demand of presence. It's about accountability. And, you know, people hear where they live, right? Because conversely, I was on election day this year, I was in Texas, of all places, speaking. And, you know, they asked me to speak about race and Trump and all that. I said, oh, okay, I can do that. That ain't my, you know, in Texas, North Texas, it was East Texas, wasn't my natural audience now. This ain't where I live. But I feel that I have to tell truth. So, but in love, but directly. And the first person that got up was a white woman. She described herself as a liberal white woman who believed all the stuff I said, but she said, I'm so angry at you. I said, okay. And then she said it again for her. She said, I am so mad at you. I said, okay, tell me why. She said, I had 3 conservative white male students here, and during your lecture, they got up and left. I said, okay, I'm sorry to hear that. I said, but now are you their teacher? Did you ask them to stay? Because that's white privilege, right? Here's something you don't like, leave. Whereas women of color, people who are poor, who fought to get in the room ain't leaving. They hear stuff every day. I said, every day I'm in the room, I hear stuff I don't want to hear. Fox News, demonizing, pathologizing people of color, black people, poor people. I said, I look up on television and see indigenous people being assaulted and immigrants. So I said, my God, if you are a liberal as you are self-described to be, bless your heart. Even if you were conservative, I don't want to turn anybody off. But I said, I think it is the job of those of us who are teachers to introduce our students to stuff they don't want to hear. And as Christians or as people of faith, we got to deal with stuff we don't like, that we don't want to hear, that we think is, you know, untoward. Because that's where the gospel lives and breathes. And I think that is what I mean by love, is willing to risk your life for the purposes of others and what you think God is. And then do the best you can in the meantime to make sure that justice prevails. Because the shorthand for love in public for me is justice. I don't want to create this as a Christian nation. It never was, it never should have been. It's not a Christian nation. And Christians have mucked it up, right? So maybe we should have the Holy Quran. You know, people get mad, right? Maybe we should have the Holy Quran put our hands on, because we've been swearing to the Bible, we've been lying. Think about this. Donald Trump put his hand on a Bible. That ought to chill you out in terms of what is the effect of a religious symbolism. So to me, love is hard, it's difficult. It's asking people to look at themselves, all of us together in the mirror, and then after doing so, to create our communities to reflect the hard, the difficult, but the necessary lessons of cooperation and of justice that we abide by.
Wow. All right. So let me get practical for a minute, because someone once said, a man from Nazareth, you cannot serve God and mammon, but there is $50K on the line here, and and the Lord has not cured me of my competitiveness, and I want to win. So let me talk about.
Sorry about those Eagles. Oh, I'm sorry. 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 I'm sorry.
Love has limits, too. I'm just going to say, love has limits.
Love has limits. So real quick, we got to talk about what we can learn about context, and talk a little bit about Philly. I'm from here. I love it, and I love it because of what we are and what we could, and because of what we could be.
Right.
And when very sincere people who probably agree with both of you and maybe with me about how the world might be, when there is a disruption around race, well-meaning folk, when there might be a breakthrough, there's a shutter stop, which is, we should really have this conversation, which I don't know what that means, but it happens a lot. That's one barrier. So we're talking about breakthroughs, and how do we talk about a breakthrough that we could make actionable? The other barrier that I think exists to breakthrough is, Philly's on a roll. A lot of good things happening here, a lot of promise. But there are some things that I think that are kind of in our atmosphere that we don't always acknowledge, which is, I think we lead the nation in passive aggression. Number one, because I'm not going to talk to you about how I really feel, because I don't know. I don't have any control over where this might go. I don't know how you feel about that. So if we're interested in a breakthrough across the divisions that are very real and are present today as much as they have ever been, we know that now, if we didn't know before. I'm curious about what are the practices, what is an idea that you think Philly should steal around a breakthrough around our painful division?
That's good. That's good. I mean, there's a lot, I think, that that would be true in many cities. A lot of what you just said. A couple things that come to mind. Number one for me is, I just believe powerfully that we are wired as human beings for empathy. And I think it's probably one of the least utilized superpowers that we utilized. And so one of the things that we've done is we brought into the conversation of race the skill of empathy, where we train on it. And we give people a context for what empathy is and how it's different from sympathy. I mean, a lot of folks in here probably read and listened to Brene Brown, and I think she has some of the best articulation of the difference between the two. And I just believe that skill of empathy is critical for this conversation. So that'd be number one. The other thing, and this is, again, the faith perspective, in the faith tradition of Christianity is the concept of repentance. And that concept is also existent certainly in other faith traditions as well. You think about Yom Kippur if you're Jewish, and that day is a day of repentance. It's a day to turn in a different direction. And I think repentance requires humility, and it requires vulnerability. And I think those things connected to empathy are the way forward. So the things that we don't name, I have my own personal recovery journey, and one of the things you learn in recovery is you're only as sick as your secrets. And so unless there's a willingness to humbly, vulnerably, with empathy, talk about the history of what has been, those things will continue to bring pain to a city. And it requires people who are courageous enough to lead the charge on that. And usually the way that works is the first person that sticks their neck out, that's usually the person that dies. That person usually doesn't live to tell the story. And that takes courage. And I think that when we talk about race and the challenge that we have in every context, in every city, in any organization, family, whatever it is, we need courageous people who are willing to go first with humility and vulnerability if there's going to be change. And I think there are courageous people. I know there's courageous people in this room. And I know there are other courageous people in the city who would be willing to come to that table with humility, vulnerability, own what's been the history, repent, turn a different direction, and experience what the Bible would say is the good news. The good news is what happens on the other side of repentance. And it is good news, but I think it only happens with courageous people willing to go first.
Amen. Amen. Yeah, I think that's the bottom line. That kind of willingness to be vulnerable, in the moment. And, in terms of real practices, your point about the conversation stopper, like we're doing, and then we got to have a conversation on race, and people don't want to have it. Like, in my classes, I teach at the well-known African-American college, Georgetown. And,
top HBCU in the country,
top
isn't it?
HBCU. And look, when John Thompson was there, it was the black college, bro. The Bulldogs. Oh, yeah, what can we do for it? Okay. So, and I'm always amazed when people kind of come to me and tell me what white folk, I teach white folk every day, dog. That's what I do. I teach white people's kids, right? Now, a lot of them write me nasty letters. You trying to warp my kids? Yes, I am. I'm trying to de-warpize them from your warpification. Damn right. But in my classroom, I know I can feel the tension of white people who want to speak, but they scared, right? If I say something, I'm going to sound like a bigot or racist, or if I ask an honest question, you're going to shoot me down. And so I say, even though it's not popular or politically correct to say, this is a safe space right here. So I tell the white kids, I said, look, ain't nobody going to say you a racist for saying what you say, right? You ain't going to stop you from talking. Now, I can't keep other people in the room from responding to what you say who might feel that way, but you're not going to be read out of the room. You're not going to be shut down because you say something that is against the grain. Now, my responsibility is to protect them long enough so that they can say what they have to say, but also protect them long enough so they can get educated, so that we can be educated. Because if they're asking out of real empathy or out of real pain and hurt and real curiosity, you can't beat people down, right?
Right.
So we were talking the other day in class, Dr. Peterson, who's here, Dr. James Peterson, was teaching my class, one of the great young scholars here in America. Where you at, Dr. Peterson? You here? Is he here? He might be downstairs. He might be downstairs.
He's at happy hour.
Huh? He is at happy hour? No, I think he's down there listening right now, trying to run upstairs. So we were in class, and I'm talking to the students, and we're trying to have an open and honest and heartfelt conversation about an issue. And I said, look, we can't rule anything out. We can't read anybody out. We were talking about Malcolm X, right? When the young white woman came to Malcolm, that famous scene, and she was so moved by him, she left Boston, found him in Harlem, and said, Mr. Minister Malcolm, what can I do as a white woman? He said, nothing. So I'm trying to, and look, I understood where he was then, and I get it, but I'm trying to echo a different answer to that young lady. I'm trying to say, if white folk want to do the right thing, we ought to answer their questions when they ask them. And if people of color, black, brown, indigenous, Latinx, and the like, are engaged in conversations and they're expressing themselves, we ought to listen to that. It's hard to listen, the young white man getting up and leaving. When you get insulted or offended and you leave, right? We gotta be thicker skinned than that. Because race conversations happen all the time. They just ain't orchestrated and coordinated. When LeBron James left Cleveland the first time to go to Miami, that was a race conversation, right? Now, in part, it was about, do you stick with your home team and can you hang out? I know y'all know about that in Philly, because your love for Santa Claus was amazing.
Why are you antagonizing?
Yo, this is Philly.
Aim your batteries that way.
Don't you get in this?
So the thing is that was a conversation. Dan Gilbert was upset. Chris Broussard and then Jesse Jackson said it sounds like he's a runaway slave, and white men move all the time, and owners choose when they're going to sell players or trade them. So the conversation on race is occurring. The question is, can we tune in? And let me tell you something. It's hard to say this, but when Barack Obama was in office, enormously gifted, incredibly smart guy, he was loath to speak about race. Black people were protective of him and defensive of him. Well, let Boo alone, let Bay alone, that's Bay. You know, he's got to do what he's got to do. And when when you only got one black president, it's hard, right? White folk are bored. 44, you know. God damn, we've had 44 of them, and they're just crazy, some of them. Well, we ain't had but one. And then white people remind me, you know he was half us. So damn, we ain't had but half a brother in the White House. So you got to understand, 44 and a half white people have been president. So you get real defensive on the one brother, right? But his disinclination to engage race cost us as a nation, right? Now you got a guy who can't stop talking about race. Oh, he will talk. Hey, want me to talk about it? Well, the thing is, right? He will talk all day long about it. My Bible tells me if you kick a demon out and you don't put nothing in its place, 7 worse will come occupy the house. And as tough as it is to acknowledge it, Obama's disinclination to engage race, and we got reasons. He's a black man. He doesn't want to be ghettoized. Every time he spoke about race, the poll numbers went down and the hostility went up. I get all that, but that's the same was true when he spoke about Russia. If Obama had drank a white Russian in the Oval Office, they'd have put his black ass out. Right? So my point is, and now you got a guy who's in the White House with a white Russian. Okay, I ain't gonna say no more jokes if y'all ain't gonna laugh. So my point is, right, he has all kind of gases, he be Putin. So the thing is that if we're honest and open and have that kind of empathy, are we willing to pay the price for real conversation? And I'm gonna tell you something else that's not popular to say. It ain't equal. It's not equivalent. Some people have done more harm than others. Don't make us break it down, you know. So stop lying about it and own up to that, what that might mean, right? I'm a man in America. It ain't equal between men and women. Yes, both get angry, both get hostile, both are full of rage, but both are not equally raping the other, creating abusive schemas of gender oppression. Stop. It is not equivalent. And when it comes, right, it's not. And so when it comes to race, the burden of dealing with whiteness, what it means, how it signifies, how it metastasizes across the body politic, and how we've got to come to grips with it. I'll end by saying this. A lot of white people say to me, you know, you got more money, your kids are better off. There's no such thing as white privilege. I say, I hear you. But you know, Jackie Robinson's kids couldn't go to the best school that was white because he had money. If it was based upon money, he could have got in. But because it wasn't based on money, white privilege of a poor person trumped that of a rich black person. Never forget that. Jim Crow didn't say all white people could go to Harvard. Jim Crow said the only people going to Harvard were white. See, the difference don't mean everybody gonna be rich. It means the people who get rich off of that happen to be white. So I'm saying that to say the difficult conversation to have right now, and maybe finally white people feel like black people and brown people do, you know, when we watch the news, oh my God, don't let it be a black person. Please don't, just don't let it be a black person shooting, stabbing, cutting, killing. Now, with Donald Trump in office, white people know the shame. They know the hurt, the pain, like, oh my God, Jiminy Cricket, not again. And Donald Trump, to me, is a great opportunity for America to have a racial conversation. And I'll say it this way. He ain't no aberration. He's an extension. What black people have been warning white Americans about how race operates, narcissistic, self-important, self-aggrandizing, will lie in your face, make shit up, and deny the truth. This is what white supremacy has been at its core. Donald Trump is an illustrated fleshly thesaurus of the pathologies that we confront. So if we can have that kind of honest conversation, I think we could go a long way. And we can do it. It doesn't mean that we can't reflect on black complicity, African American and Latinx complicity. It doesn't mean that we don't talk about shortcomings and failures and flaws on both sides. But it's not an equivalent argument, and it's one that my Bible says, to whom much is given, much is required.
I feel like you're just getting started, but that's cool. So I'm watching Time, and one of the things that's a great, linguistically they sound like the same thing, or they've gotten confused or confounded, the difference between being optimistic and hopeful.
Yeah.
And
That's right.
the hope that is found in the faith traditions and the story that I have given obedience to, it has authority, right? I don't get a choice in real ways. I have to conform to this hopeful story that is, at the end of the day, a subversive narrative.
Yes, it is.
Meaning
Yes, it is.
there is a subversion to what is on view. Many of look, the fastest growing segment in the country as it relates to faith are called the nuns, not like habits and rosary beads. No thank you. But in this time that is so desperate, confusing, upsetting, distressing, I know something that is a subversion. There is something available that is more true than what I can see. And this idea that there is a preferential option and special attention that needs to be attended to the widow, the alien, and the orphan, that the one who is on the outside has the prime seat at the table. The outcast is to be welcomed home. This whole narrative influences and stabilizes positive action. And my question to you is, how, and please don't bring up that guy again, Dr. Dyson, I just can't.
I hear you.
Can we, without being Pollyannish, talk about a steadfast hope that sustains your positive action when it gets very grim, and you feel like you don't have any strength left and you feel like giving up? Wherein do you find your hope?
Man, I could preach on that.
I know.
Man,
It's like volleyball.
Man, come on now.
like
Come
volleyball.
on now. Hebrews,
To set you
right?
up.
We have this hope as an anchor for the soul. We have this hope as an anchor for the soul. The narrative that drives that faith that you said we come under the authority of, and it's beautiful to think about it at this time of the year. I'm always struck by the contrast at Christmas between darkness and light. And, if I could, I'd have them cut off all the lights in this room right now, all of them, and have you take out your cell phone and just put on that flashlight. And the darkness cannot be dialed up anymore to drown out the light that one of your cell phones can cause. And I just think that's what we need to recognize, is that within each person is what would be called the imago Dei, the image of God. And when that shines forth, there is no amount of darkness that can drown out that light. I think it was Václav Havel was talking about the struggle in Yugoslavia that they had, dark times. And he said that when they were in that struggle, they needed a lot of things. He said, but mostly what we needed was hope. Someone who was willing to be a witness in dark places. And I think that that's the demand that I see in the Bible, that I read, is, when Jesus sent people out, he sent them to be witnesses. Martyr is that word. It's to be a martyr. And he said, you're going to be my witnesses in Jerusalem, and Judea, and Samaria, and to the ends of the earth. And just know that when Jesus was saying those things, the people he was saying it to didn't like all those places. That included people they didn't want to spend time with. That included the Samaritans that they would make a big trip around and take the most indirect route because they didn't want to be in relationship with those folks. And I'm telling you, what I see and what stabilizes me and mobilizes me to continue is that I believe that, if 12 people took that command and said, we're going to do it, even when it's hard. And here I am 2,000 years removed from that, and that light is still having an effect on my life and in the lives of so many other people. I think we need to look at that and recognize that there is hope, and we do have a hope that can anchor us in dark times. And when we are a witness, when we are willing to be a person who sends light into the world, and we are willing to act according to that, we lift other people's hope as well. So that's what I would say. I think that that's all it takes for change to happen is one person who says, I'm not going to let my light be snuffed out. I'm going to continue to shine.
Amen. I mean, this is beautiful. Amen. That point that you brilliantly made, Pastor, is Rhino Niebuhr's point, right? That optimism is a shallow virtue. Because optimism is based on what you can tell, the tea leaves you read, the signs of the time. But hope, right? Hope against hope?
Yeah.
This is hope against hope, right? That is a deep and profound and existential investment in what you can't understand. Now, you can go two ways. As the great theologian Stephen Morris said, when you believe in things you don't understand, then you suffer. Superstition ain't the way. Okay, Stevie Wonder, that's his real name. But his name was Stephen Morris. He was born with that. He's a great theologian. As the roundness of the earth. So, when you believe in things you don't understand, then you suffer. But superstition ain't the way. Suffering is inevitable.
Yes.
Right? The hope is necessary because the Pollyannish view, the optimistic view, ain't what prevails. People who love God hurt, die, suffer, leave too early. And those who commit wicked deeds prosper. Right? That's what the gangster rap of the Old Testament said. Right? The psalmist. Right? It was gangster rap. Kill my enemies, wipe out their kids, step on their mother.
That's right.
And by the way, bless me on the way. Right? That's Snoop Dogg for you right there. So for me, your point is so poignant, and both of you have so eloquently pointed to it. Hope is when you can't even see it, don't even know to want it. But there's something in you, right? That is touched. Why is it that the folk with money who have the ability to go to therapy, God bless them, and who may hurt and harm themselves, and those on the front line who have no choice but to hope, to get up, they're the one, the cynicism comes from luxury, right? Hope is a product of necessity.
Wow.
So for me, when I think about that hope, Howard Thurman said, never reduce your dreams to the event that you experience now. Wow. Never reduce your dreams to the level of the event that you confront now. He said, you got a choice. You can be a prisoner of events, or you can be a prisoner of hope. He said our slave foreparents, speaking to African American people, but others can participate, he said our slave foreparents look forward to a day beyond the long, rows of cotton and the rawhide whip of the overseer. They imagined a different world. And so John Lennon knew about that. Imagine, right? He spoke about it. So hope is a resonant possibility in the midst of impossible conditions. There's no explanation for it. There's no rational explanation because you don't know. We don't know when Rosa Parks is going to sit on a bus. And she sits on the bus not because she's tired. That story is crazy. She was an activist. She was a woman who worked against the rape of women. And she decided that day not to move. And when she didn't move, the universe did. And so she didn't stand up. She refused to so that millions more might. And a young preacher in Alabama. Who knew? Studying to get a PhD. And then he, quoting Rhino Niebuhr, said, the battering rams of historical necessity thrust me in this position. So when you hope, you unleash the key to somebody else's possibility. Yeah. And sometimes when you help them, you help yourself. You know, because sometimes it's dark. As Pastor Mingo said, it's dark, you don't know, you can't figure it out. You're supposed to know because you're a person of faith and people are depending on you, and yet you're depressed, your spirit is jacked up. If you want to look at depressed people, look at the Bible. I mean, John dressing up in leather girdles and honey, dude, you depressed, okay? That's some manic, yeah, I don't know what it is, right? Eating grasshoppers, all right, you know? So, I mean, look at Jeremiah crying the blues. Yep. But the blues are the attempt of the cosmos to readjust itself to the limits that are imposed by lack of faith. And so hope is a bridge between not yet and can be. So for me, I mean, I believe no matter what. But is a great word in the but.
The and yet.
But. You know what I'm saying? These men can preach that. I could hand the microphone over to them, pass out the collection plate, because they can preach on that conjunction, right? But God, but standing up. So I believe that with no reason to invest in possibility, we must nevertheless do so. And what gives me hope is talking to young people and feeling their energy and knowing when I meet enlightened people of all races who stop and say, I'm praying for you. You can't color code God's grace. You can't dictate or determine the anatomy of faith in whoever will love and touch you. So for me, I believe we live at risk of constantly being snuffed out. But the main ingredient that protects us against the cynicism and despair is a hope that we can't explain, but that we must somehow bear in our own lives and then bear witness to in our own mouths, and then be open and honest enough to know that there are many other ways in which that hope can come, but if you cut yourself off, you won't be able to receive it. I'll end by saying this. Remember that story of Elijah in the Bible? It is enough, O Lord, now take away my life, for I am not better than my fathers. They have taken down thy altars and slain all thy prophets. And God says, slow down. You know what? Get some water. Get some food. You're hungry. Go to Budokan, get a meal. Go to Jones. Go to Pod. Go to the soul food restaurant, get you some grub, because you are physiologically at risk of being driven into a state of depression. And then when you eat and take some rest, wake up and see 7,000 others ain't bowed their knees, bowed down to Baal. You ain't the only one. So stop acting like it. And the reason I tell people when they get upset, there were only 7 people at the meeting. Where there's always only 7 people at the meeting. Right? You look on TV. The problem is you look at TV, you see the great marches. I have a dream. Most of the time, kings spend time in a room with 25 people.
That's right.
Right? That's what you don't see.
That's right.
The unsexy normal versus the sexy spectacular. You got to learn to live in the unsexy normal. And when you live in the unsexy normal, you begin to redefine the consciousness of God and the grace of the Almighty. Because right there in that spot, in a room with a few people who follow you, the fate of the universe is at stake if you believe that narrative. And even if you don't believe that narrative, it's at stake because your life is at stake. And you're constantly renegotiating with God and self if you believe in that. And if you don't believe in it, you're renegotiating with your sense of destiny, whatever you might call it. And so in that sense, You never give up on the possibility that something new and strange and different will happen. Some guy giving a speech at a convention that nobody even knew his name the day before. The next day his book is a bestseller. 4 years later, he's a president. Stuff happens, right? That stuff happens, but greater stuff happens as well. So hope is, I'm so glad you said, is not optimism, because you ain't got to be optimistic. You ain't got to be, optimistic versus pessimistic. That's a false dichotomy. That's flip sides of the same coin, yeah. But hope, that delivers you into a different realm of possibility. And if you refuse to reduce your dreams to the level of the event, which is your immediate experience, you can chip away at what is to bring into existence what ought to be. That's the great hope that I at least live with.
All right.
Yeah.
So we are coming to the end, and we are the three people standing between these good people and their happy hour. So I want to do a lightning round real quick, and there's a custom since we're last. The custom in our communities is to offer a blessing, a benediction. So the lightning round is for you to, I'll start while you gather your thoughts, to offer a blessing on this city that is your home, and it's your spiritual home and my home. And I took on this responsibility at United Way, not necessarily for any other reason, because they narrowed the focus to meaningfully reduce and engage the poverty rate. And when I was interviewing, they said, talk about the interventions that you think might move the needle. And I said, the first thing you need to understand is that we need to confront the spiritual dimension of the suffering generated by poverty. I grew up Roman Catholic, and I learned the 7 deadly sins. Anyone raise your hand if you have any idea what I'm talking about. Amen. Okay. And you run through them. There's all these ones. And the one that always captured my imagination, because I didn't understand it, was sloth. Sloth. It sounds like laying in the bathwater too long. Lazy. But sloth actually means, the Greek is akadia. Akadia. Which basically means apathy.
That's right.
I don't care. I don't care. And when you stop caring, you're dead. And so I would pray, as we leave this place, we dig as deep as we've ever dug inside ourselves to sustain love and sacrifice. Yes. Lightning round.
Lightning round. Mine would be the words you mentioned, Jeremiah, and I would speak to you the words that he wrote in Jeremiah 29 to exiles, to people who have been taken from their land. And he said to them, build where you are. Plant where you are. Seek the welfare of the city to which I have sent you. Because if you prosper, if the city prospers, he said, then you will prosper. And so I would leave you with that blessing, because I know that in this room are people who have chosen to build, you've chosen to plant, you've chosen to seek the welfare of a city that I dearly love, that will always be home for me. And may it be that as this city prospers, may you prosper as well.
Two poets, Alfred Lord Tennyson, though much is taken, much abides. And though we are not now that strength which in old days moved earth and heaven, that which we are, we are. One equal temper of heroic hearts, made weak by time and fate, but strong in will, to strive, to seek, to find, and not to yield. And then the second one, I used to pray for times like this to rhyme like this. So I had to grind like that to shine like this. From a young man, Meek Mill, from the bowels of the utter despair of this city, to rise up to become an emblem of criminal justice in the midst of the onslaught against the bodies and the beliefs of the vulnerable. Hear those words because they resonate as one of an urban prophet who bears witness to the best insight that he knows. Those are the words I'd leave you with.